Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in to the Boxing Authorities. Joining me at the desk, as always, Dupree Jr., Smokin Jim Frazier, and my name is Claudio Reilsono. Special guest today, the author of the new book, Redemption, the Rocky Marciano story, Volume 1, 1923 to 1949. Our guest today is Mr. John Cameron. John, thank you so much for being on the show.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right. First of all, John, let me ask this. Why did you choose Rocky Marciano?
I don't really think I chose Rocky Marciano. I think he chose me, to be honest, because I've heard about him ever since I was a kid. I think I've spoken to your good self in the past and told you the story of how my father introduced me to Rocky. And he's just such a remarkable guy. I just wanted to find out as much as I possibly could. So it's what I've spent the last several decades doing, and it's finally here. So that's good.
And we see your nose, so I'm assuming you was a former fighter.
Oh, yes, yeah. I was a fighter in my youth. That's how my father was telling me about Rocky and what he could do. I used to think I was the bee's knees, but then he told me about Rocky, and I thought, no. But it's funny you should say that, because Perry Marciano, Rocky's nephew, actually said, as soon as I saw your face, I knew you were the guy that should be writing this book. So it put me in good stead.
Yeah, that's funny. Jim is real big on facial features and looks in terms of boxers, so I figured he would catch that immediately. But just the title, Redemption. How did you come up with the title, and why?
Well, everything. That's a good question. A lot of people have asked me that, and certain individuals have said, why Redemption? Because he's always been at the very top. But Rocky's story over the years, people use a lot of his stories against him, and when new things come out, they use it to knock him or to knock his legacy. So redemption kind of means redeeming and bringing back to a place, bringing back to the top. So that's my main goal with this biography, which is why I've really dug in as definitive as possible, so that people will read the full story, and Rocky Marciano won't be seen as this small little heavyweight from back in the 50s who got lucky, but was somebody who actually really worked and really earned his place in the top of the heavyweight pantheon.
You mentioned the word fascinated. What was the one thing out of all the studying and research that you did, what was the one thing that fascinated you most about Rocky? In the ring and out.
The fact that he was so small. The fact that he was 187, 190 pounds. He was 5'11". Some people say he was shorter, but his army records state he was 5'11". He was tiny, even for back in the day, back in the 50s, 40s and 50s. If you got a heavyweight over 200 plus pounds, they were big guys back then. But it was the fact that even though he seemed so, everything seemed against him. Everything seemed against Rocky. He had a crooked right arm. He couldn't straighten his arm out. He had a bad back where he fell from a cherry tree when he was a kid. He had 2 left feet. He didn't start boxing properly until he was 23, 24 years old. A little bit earlier in the army, 22, 23. But everything seemed against him. When he first turned professional, the first coaches would say to him, just forget about it, Rocky. You haven't got a chance. And yet he took every single disadvantage that he appeared to have, and through work ethic, through sheer hard work, he turned it into an advantage, and he made his height work for him by making himself smaller. He was so much harder to hit than everyone, or a lot of people say he was. Right. He had a very smart defense, and that power that he could generate with those tree trunk legs of his was just phenomenal. And the scariest thing is that from people that I've spoken to and from research that I've done, Rocky was actually more phenomenal when he was 3-4 weeks out from a fight, when he was closer to 200 pounds. So he had to train down to get down to 187. So the thought of Rocky Marciano being another 5-6 pounds heavier is, he's just devastating. He's remarkable. And he's not just remarkable for what he achieved in the ring. I think it shows, especially in the day and age we live in now, where it doesn't matter what people say to you, that you cannot do it. If you believe in yourself and you work and you do what you need to do, you can achieve anything. If Rocky can become the undefeated heavyweight champion of the world, there's nothing stopping any of us from achieving what we want to achieve. He's a remarkable man.
You know, Smokin Jim talks about all the time Rocky's training methods and how long he'd be in a camp. He used to train 200 rounds, as
Minimum.
you know, 200 rounds for back then a 15-round fight. Talk a little bit about. Was it fear that motivated him? Was it being the champion? What was it that motivated him to be in that training facility for so long and for so hard?
He just wanted to be the best. He knew full well what his own limitations were, and he knew full well that if he didn't give it absolutely everything, that he wasn't going to be the best. And he used to say that he would fear his opponents for a little while, and then as soon as he stepped in the ring, he would just forget all about it, because he knew that if he trained and if he was sharper than his opponents and if he was fitter, then he wasn't going to lose. He refused to lose. Of course, there was the aspect of it as well where he didn't want to go back to being poor. He found something that he really was good at, and he wanted to make sure that he never lost a fight so that he could retire when he did, and had some money in his pocket, and didn't want to go the way of other fighters that he'd seen. But it was just sheer will and sheer determination that he absolutely refused to lose. And he never did, did he? Apart from in the amateurs, he lost 1 or 2.
Yeah, the two guys, real quick, Luth and Jim, that I think went hardest in training camp was Rocky and Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali, he just, like against Foreman prior to the fight, he hired Ernie Shaver. This is the story. Ernie Shaver's brother, who could hit, basically just hit him in the body so he could train for the Foreman fight. But Rocky and Muhammad. Luther, I'm sure you have some questions.
Yeah, you mentioned, the title Redemption. One of the knocks that people say, there were a lot of fixed fights back then. In your research, did you find anything about that? And can you just talk about, some of the things where they try to knock Rocky? About.
Nope, yeah, that's fine. That's one of the biggest things, isn't it? Is they always say that he was fed a load of setups on his way up, because they look at people can't understand now. You see people like Usyk, who's had 19, 20 fights and is the world champion multiple times over. And then you look at Rocky, who had 39, 40 fights before he even fought for a championship. So people are saying, oh, a lot of those people he fought back in the day then were absolute pushovers and nobodies. Not one single person he fought back in the day, with the odd exception, was a pushover. Because as you guys know, who are into boxing and know about your boxing, back in the 30s, 40s and 50s, there were a lot of fantastic fighters out there, a lot of hungry fighters, a lot of what we would refer to as club fighters, who would get a phone call with 2 or 3 hours notice to come in and fight. You know what it was like back in those days. So Rocky, the fact that Rocky I think he had 16 fights in his first year and 17, 18 fights in his second year. And like he said, I fought to learn how to fight. That's what I kept doing. Even back in the 60s, Rocky mentioned in an interview that he thought it was pretty comical that people were having so few fights. And this was back in the 60s, before they became a contender. So none of the people Rocky fought back in the day were pushovers, despite a couple of stories of people saying, I was approached and I was asked to do this and asked to do that. No, they weren't. None of them were asked to lay down for Rocky, because obviously he had some connections after he retired from boxing, and every single one of those have all confirmed that they left Rocky alone. Rocky was completely left alone on his way up, left to get on with it. And in fact, in his very early career, Rocky was 24 years old. He was being fed to other fighters as a setup, because they were like, we've got this kid from Brockton, he's 24, you can't do this, just we'll send your boy in against him just to give him another name. Rocky was steamrolling over him. He was absolutely pulverizing him. Other things, obviously, you talk about people saying he was fed setups, saying he fought old men when he got to the championship class. Jersey Joe Wolcott was officially 38, 39 years old. Potentially could have been older. And yet, if you look at modern equivalent of that today, you're Bernard Hopkins in his 40s, George Foreman in his 40s, Ezzard Charles, another one. He was slightly on the way down, but again, he was only 34, 35 when he fought Rocky, and Rocky at that time was 31. So Rocky didn't fight old men. He didn't fight old over-the-hill fighters. He fought people who potentially might have been slightly on the way down, apart obviously from Joe Louis. you know, we all know, we all hold our hands up and say, you know, Joe Louis was right on the very slide at the time. But he didn't fight old, broken fighters. Archie Moore continued on as the light heavyweight champion for another 3 or 4 years after Rocky had finished with him. So Archie Moore was not an old man. That needs to stop. All of that sort of talk and all of that saying Rocky doesn't deserve to be where he is because of this, because of that, that has to stop. And people need to understand that Rocky was a man in the 1950s who fought the very best, especially when he got to championship class, and pretty much everyone that he faced, from Louis onwards, had earned a right to face Rocky. So, no, you've got to stop doing that. The book's going to explain all of that, and as Claudio will probably know from reading the first volume, a lot of the early fights, I haven't just gone into Rocky fought A, B, C, D. I've actually gone in and tried to find as much as I can about the guys he fought well in order to explain to the reader that these guys weren't pushovers. They were real, genuine fighters. And on their given day, they could have achieved a lot had they not run into Rocky Marciano. He spoiled a lot of people's boxing careers by putting a stop.
Yeah, do you think a lot of the criticism that Rocky has is because they didn't understand that once you got in there and fought Rocky, you was never the same fighter afterwards?
That's very true. As I say, the only person really that you could sort of make a counterclaim about that is obviously the old mongoose, Archie Moore. He was the only one really who, after he fought Rocky, actually carried on. Not in the heavyweight class, obviously, but in his own division, he carried on and still did some amazing things. His fight with Yvonne Durrell, for instance, it's like, how can he do that at that age? But everybody else Rocky fought, he beat them up so bad. And this is what people don't understand. And you can't get that concept from watching him on YouTube, which I was born after Rocky had passed away. I never met the man. But I've spoken to so many people who were there at the training camps, were there at the fight. And they said, you just cannot imagine what it was like actually seeing him go to work in the ring and the damage he was doing to these people. In one of his early fights, he hit somebody so hard that he knocked their gum shield out into the third row of the crowd. I mean, the power that he had was just extraordinary. So it's really not surprising that a lot of fighters weren't as good after Rocky had finished with them, because he was a complete bone breaker. He was absolutely destructive. And he was actually better before he became champion, because he was fighting once a month, once every other month. So he was kept sharp all the time. And as he became champion, he had more time to learn things, learn different techniques. It kind of took his power away a little bit, because he was getting a little bit more, sounds crazy now, but a little bit more fancy. So if you watch his fights leading up to the championship, and then you watch him as a champion, very, very slight little differences that you can notice, where before he would just go for it.
A couple things, the questions that Luther and Jim mentioned, some things popped into my head. What he did to Rex Lane, he sheared his teeth off. And then Kid Matthews, he punched him so hard that he shoved his teeth into his gums. And what he did to Roland Lastars was a hell of a fighter who gave Rocky trouble the first fight. And then Carmine Vingo was supposed to beat Rocky, and he finished his career. But the other thing, too, is something that I mentioned this to Jerry Coon whenever he fought Ken Norton. Everybody thinks about the big punches, yes. But he did some very good pivoting in that fight that people don't talk about. Marciano threw a left against Ezra Charles, and he missed. And he did a quick 1-2, left-right with his foot, and he came with an overhand right. Beautiful. So they make it sound like Rocky was just a clumsy guy who, and not to rip on Tony Galento, but they kind of made it sound like he was just like Tony Galento. And Rocky, the fights that he got banged up against, Jersey Joe Walcott won, Ezra Charles when he split his nose, and that was about it as far as getting facial damage. I mean, they made it sound, and then again, back to Luther's question, Frankie Carbo said, Rocky stays clean. That was the exact quote. But Jim and Luther, if you guys have something, please.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Now, also, when I think of redemption, what's big now are these top 10 lists. In your opinion, where do you have based on the title, I can imagine. Where do you have Rocky, and maybe give like your top 5 heavyweights of all time?
Good question.
That is a good question. You see, I don't like to get involved in these hypotheticals. If some people have asked me how would Rocky do against X, Y, Z, and I stay right out of that. But personally, my personal top 5 heavyweights of all, and this is completely personal opinion, not in any particular order. My personal top 5 would have to be Lennox Lewis would be in there. Mike Tyson would be in there, the young Mike Tyson. Tyson from 84, 85, 86 onwards. I'd have to have Larry Holmes would be in there as well. Obviously Rocky and Evander Holyfield. They would be in my top 5, but it changes.
Right.
Yeah, I'm glad. I know Luther and I are glad you mentioned Lennox Lewis.
Yes.
Jim's not too happy about it. But we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back with some more questions with John Cameron, the author of the great book Redemption, the life of Rocky Marciano, 1923 to 1949, Volume 1. Right back with the Boxing Authorities.
Before we go on, please subscribe, like, and ring the notification bell to learn more about the remarkable Rocky Marciano.
Welcome back to the Boxing Authorities. Okay, John, continue. Okay, Luther asked you a great question about the top 5 boxers of all time, and we're right there with you. Jim, you have anything? Another question? Oh, you don't? Okay, Luther, I'm sorry.
No, I'm glad you mentioned Lennox Lewis. I think he's a guy that doesn't get a lot of credit over, at least in the States, when we do our top. But I'm saying everybody he fought, he beat. He put them all down. They might have got him once, but he came back and destroyed them. You had Mike Tyson on your list. He came back and got him. He got Evander after he was robbed. He gave it a draw. He came back and, So I'm glad you mentioned that. He's the heart of a champion as well. And I'm just glad you said that.
Yeah, that's not being British either, but because I don't know if Lennox Lewis is British or American or he decides on the day, but he was an extraordinary fighter because, like you say, he learned constantly as he went through his career. He didn't get worse. He actually got better with each fight, and he would learn from his mistakes. And I think one of his greatest fights was actually his final fight against Klitschko.
Yes.
Yeah, where Klitschko took that fight on. I think it was something stupid like 6 weeks' notice or something like that. So Lennox hadn't done his own work on that fight. And yes, in the early couple of rounds, Klitschko was dominating. He was dominating. But then suddenly, especially after the cut, Lennox proved that he was a true champion because he found a way to win a fight. And he was improving. He was getting sharper. That fight had gone if buts and maybes. If that fight hadn't have been stopped because of the cut, then I would have seen Lennox was just going to cruise on past him then. He figured him out. He found out how to defeat him, and he worked on it. So even then, when he was in his mid to late 30s, I think at that time, he proved what a championship heart and what a championship brain he had as well. So I think those people who don't put him at least in their top 10. Well, I'm not going to say because somebody there doesn't like him very much, but that's fine.
We're talking about Lennox, and you mentioned Klitschko, and I don't know what year we can start, but a lot of the fighters today, the De La Hoyas, the Klitschkos, Lennox, Roy Jones Jr., a lot of those guys, Boom Boom Mancini, they have their money. The guys back when Rocky fought, they didn't have their money. Talk to us. Basically, I know the history of it, and I was fascinated and respected the hell out of the fact that Rocky had his quote, they're going to make fun of you if you have money and keep it. They're going to make fun of you if you made money and lost it. I'd rather keep it. Tell us about Rocky Marciano and his relationship with money.
Well, Rocky, as everybody, that's another thing that sometimes gets used against him is they call him a cheapskate and parsimonious with money. But, of course, we're all the same, aren't we? If we get a chance to make a buck, we're going to try our best to make a buck. And when Rocky Marciano was the champion of the world, he fought in those 6-7 fights where he fought for the championship. He made $3 million, but he didn't. Al Weil ended up taking Al Weil, let's not go there. That's all in the book. But he ended up taking 50% of Rocky's purse, so that's 1.5 million.
Oh,
Then Rocky had to pay everybody off the top as well. So Rocky himself once said, I was lucky if I made $400,000 from doing everything that he'd done. So when Rocky had a chance, obviously, to make money, cash money, nice folding green, which is going out of circulation these days, so who knows what he would have done if he was around today. But if he had a chance to have a wad of money in his pocket and he didn't have to end up paying it over to Al Wild, because Al Wild and Rocky's managerial relationship didn't end when Rocky retired in 1956, like a lot of people think. It actually continued on for another 2 or 3 years. And it ended up, Al Wild actually ended up paying Rocky $50,000 to break up the contract, but Rocky still had to do certain favors for Al Wild going forward. So their relationship kind of lasted for a lot longer than people realized. But of course, Rocky would take the cash. He didn't want checks because that was having to pay on it, having to pay to get it. He would take the money all the time. But growing up in Brockton, he wasn't poor. He wasn't destitute by any means, but he came from a relatively large family, 5 siblings in the house. So money was important to him. When he was a kid, he would earn maybe $2 and he would end up giving his mother pretty much all the money. One day she told a story of how once she came home and she found that there was a necklace on the side, and Rocky had saved up any money that he got, about 50 cents a week, which, you know, today, I don't know what that would be today, probably not very much, but he would save up his money and actually he bought his mother a present. So money meant a lot to him in terms of actually getting it, but it was more for the fact of what he could do for other people with it, because he didn't live a life of luxury. Yes, a lot of what he did, he got for free, and why not? He was the champion. If you want me to be around you, he would say, then you've got to pay for it, pretty much.
Right.
So, but money to him was more means to an end rather than just wanted it for the sake of having lots of money. So he was getting money to sort out other people. And so there are times as well where he was given the opportunity to do a public appearance or something, and he came across a boxer who was more hard up on his luck. He'd pass that over to this other guy and say, there you go, look, you can go, you offer me $5,000, but I tell you what, I've got this friend of mine who needs a few bucks, so if you give him $2,500, he'll go and do it for you. So he turned down money and offers just as often as he took it up as well.
Right. That's the question I was going to ask you about, how Rocky would help some of the boxers that were struggling. At the time, like you said, a lot of boxers would lose their purse. They would get into bad deals. And he did a lot of things to help people. Can you just expound a little more about some of the things he did as well?
Well, as I said, he would help out a lot of the fighters who were around at the time. Rocky always said that of all his 49 fights, he said he was friends with everybody. Everyone he fought afterwards, he was friends with. Toxie Hall, somebody that Rocky didn't actually fight in the ring, but spent many years as Rocky's sparring partner. Rocky got him a job in Chicago as a police officer.
Okay.
He would do things like that for people to give them a break in life, use his name and use his fame to say, look, I've got a friend of mine, he needs a job, give him a break. Again, if he was at an appointment, maybe he couldn't make it, he'd pass it on to someone else. Rocky hated seeing, especially fighters, he hated seeing them down on their luck, broken fighters, shining shoes, selling matches. He hated that. So if he had the opportunity to actually give them something, then he would, even if it ended up costing him. Ezzard Charles, classic example, when obviously Ezzard ended up getting ill and having the MS and became really quite seriously ill in the latter part of his life. Rocky was the one who made sure he organised a contribution and got people together to actually get Ezzard Charles money to be able to pay for his expenses for his medical. The same with when he fought Carmine Vingo. Rocky paid for some of, not all, but some of Carmine Vingo's expenses, even though Rocky at the time, back in 1949, early 1950, wasn't earning as much as he would. He still made sure that he gave back to people. So for as much as Rocky seemed to take, he gave back just as much and sometimes even more.
Sure did.
That's impressive.
You know what? We're going to take another quick break, and we're going to come back with the author of the brand new book, Redemption, The Life of Rocky Marciano, Volume 1, 1923 to 1949, when we come back to the Boxing Authorities.
I usually enjoy talking with these guys. So show them some love and subscribe to the channel SteelCityLuke. The link's in the description below.
Welcome back to the Boxing Authorities. You know, John, leaving on the last note, you talked about what he did for Ezra Charles, and he helped out Joe Louis a lot too. And I know Joe Louis absolutely loved Rocky, as you said that they all did. But how about the Marciano family? What were their thoughts about Rocky, and what were their thoughts about your project on the book?
There's mixed thoughts by the Marciano family, and I totally get it, because obviously I'm delving into some areas of Rocky's life that they rather I didn't, which I find is important to do because it's telling a full story. Nothing that I'm discovering about Rocky is in any way changing my mind on him. It just makes him even more remarkable in my mind. But this is the brothers who are great people and have given me information that is fantastic, but they've kind of pulled away from the project. But the younger Marciano family, the Marciano family, his nephews, people that knew him from in the late 60s onwards, they've been incredibly supportive. Nephews and nieces, they've sent me things, they've sent me pictures and letters, and they've sent me stuff where I genuinely thought I would never ever be able to obtain this sort of information, because I always felt it was absolutely vital that the family was involved in some way. But yeah, the nephews and nieces and Rocky's son as well have been absolutely supportive of the project, and are liking what I'm doing, and essentially are saying, just keep doing it, because we want the real Rocky known to everybody. And that's what I'm trying to do, get a definitive account.
You know, first of all, real quick, what's Rocky's son doing? I know, unfortunately, his daughter passed away a few years ago. But what's Rocco's? And they do keep does he keep the name Marciano or Marciano?
He does, yeah. Although on social media he uses the name Marciano, which you would, but yeah, no, his private accounts and that, he's Rocky Marciano Jr. And a lot of members of the family are really proud of him for keeping that name. Good. But as to what he actually does, do you know, I don't know.
He was involved in real estate. I don't know if he's still involved in that or now. And I'm sure they they have a wine after Rocky. You know, there's pictures, obviously, and things like that. I'm sure that they've, you know, licensed that. But Luther?
Yeah, I was asking, now, we see your book. Have you looked at any of the Rocky movies, and do you think they did any justice? I mean, hopefully your book is going to be a little better than some of those movies that have come out about Rocky.
Well, you'd have to ask Claudio that. He's read the book. Is it better than the movies?
Oh, you know what? I said, first of all, it's an excellent book. Like, you talk about Rocky falling from a tree and how that affected him and all that. So you were extremely detailed. And we know about the fights, but I also want to know about the person, which you did a fantastic job about. The movies, let's just say, okay, like my daughter, she knows everything about Rocky because I told her about it. But let's say she didn't know anything about Rocky, and she watches the first movie was 1973. I wasn't that crazy about that. But the second one, I forgot what year, with Jon Favreau. And it was okay, but like the thing, Al Wow, like the one documentary on SportsCenter, the Rocky hauled off and Al Wow smacked Rocky Marciano. That never happened. He didn't smack Rocky Marciano. And then, but my point is, when you make a movie on somebody, you have a hell of a responsibility. Yeah. Yes, that one. Yeah. You have a hell of a responsibility, John, Luther and Jim, to give an honest viewing of that person, because, like, I would know what was right and wrong, but let's say somebody else doesn't, and they're going to think that Rocky was controlled by the mob, or that guy slapped him, or that he wasn't there, or he was a stumble, you know, he was clumsy, you know. So you have a hell of a responsibility when you do a biography, a biopic, to be accurate. And those movies, you know, the second one, the Favreau thing, touched a little bit about the money, touched a little bit about how much Rocky loved Joe Louis and all that, but they made it sound like Al Wow at first, was, you know, 150% of what you got. But after a while, Rocky wasn't going to put up with Al Wow or anybody else, you know, and they should have done that. Another thing I didn't like about the movie, they stopped at the Joe Louis fight. There was so much more to Rocky than the Joe Louis fight. And there was so much more to Rocky after his career was over. You know, so I'm sorry, but go ahead and talk about that.
No, I completely agree with you about the movies. I mean, the first movie that came out in '77, Tony Lobianco one.
Tony Bianco.
Because I've spoken obviously to members of the family, and they preferred that one because it's kind of telling a little touchy-feely story.
Yeah.
Than the Favreau one, which is it's just disgusting. There's hardly anything about that is even factually correct. It's got Rocky visiting Joe Louis in a mental asylum. For goodness,
Yeah.
that didn't even happen until after Rocky had passed away. And it shows Carmine Vingo's mother slapping him.
Yes,
again,
yes. And they showed Carmine Vingo getting carried away from the Madison Square Garden to the hospital in the pouring rain. When you have an interesting life like Rocky, you don't have to embellish.
Exactly.
Tell the truth.
The amount of people, it's true. The amount of people have said that. I mean, I've spoken to members of the Farrell family. Obviously, the brother of Mickey Farrell was one of the guy that died in the plane with Rocky. So the Farrell family knew Rocky really well. And they all said the same thing. That film is absolutely, both films, they said, but the Favreau one is absolutely disgusting. They said they don't need to do anything to embellish Rocky's life because the actual story, if somebody just made a movie of the story as it was, it would far outweigh anything that's ever come before because it's a fascinating story. It's a fascinating life. He doesn't need embellishment. He doesn't need people making him out to be some sort of wise guy or mafia controlled or that. He was depicted as quite a nasty character in the Favreau film, quite arrogant, and really not very nice guy. So if anybody watched that film and went, that's what Rocky Marciano must have been like, then just burn it and throw it away because no, he was nothing like that. He had traits, we all do, but no, that characterization of Rocky was absolutely disgusting. I've forgotten your question now. I was getting carried away.
No, you answered it. One thing, Rocky, how do you think he would do now? How big would he be in today's current environment with social media and the type of guy he was?
No, that's a good question. Yeah, that's a good question. I was speaking to someone and they said that Rocky found it difficult as he got towards the end of his life because he actually became more famous during the late 60s than he was as the heavyweight champion. He could walk down the street in New York as heavyweight champion of the world, and he could walk down without one single person going, "Hey, Rock, hey, champ." Wow. And that used to irk him. As he got into the 1960s, he actually became far more famous, and he got to a point where he didn't actually even like taking flights on commercial airliners, which could potentially have led to his tragic demise because he was getting too much attention all the time. If he'd have been around now in the age of social media, well, I mean, he was a bit of a hermit when he was training anyway. I don't think you wouldn't see or hear very much of him at all, I don't think, because although he liked attention, he didn't like that much attention because he was quite a private and shy and reserved individual, which a lot of people have said that the Rocky that they knew when he was just out and about around in private with them was really quite shy. He was really very reserved, would speak very quietly, very softly. But obviously he was Rocky Marciano, so everybody sort of congregated towards him. But social media, I think, would have just blown his mind.
What was it with Rocky and phone companies?
Phone companies.
He didn't like paying for a phone bill, did he? He didn't like that's covered in the first volume.
Yep.
He had a little slug that he would put onto a little piece of wire, and he would trick, which obviously you can't do today. So I don't know how he'd survived in the modern era, but he would trick the phone machine into thinking it had taken his coin. But he actually learnt that from Charlie Goldman. Charlie Goldman used to do that back in the 30s and that, and he taught Rocky and a lot of his boxers exactly how to do that.
See, I didn't know that. But the one story, he was in LaGuardia where the machine kept his slug. And he started busting some of the phones. Yeah. And people say, "Hey, Rocky Marciano." Yeah. And he would take a picture of him and he'd go back to busting the phones. No,
that's a true story. Yeah. He ripped all the phones out of there.
Now tell us about Volume 2, because I'm very excited about that as well.
That's good. So am I. It's going to be coming. I'm aiming for it to come out next September 2023, for obvious reasons, the centenary of Rocky's birth. Wow, and that obviously is going to go in. It's going to start off in the immediate aftermath of the Carmine Vingo fight, I've still got a lot of information to put in about Carmine Vingo. That's going to start off volume 2, go right through 1950. It'll be the build-up, obviously Joe Louis, his fights with Rex Lane, etc., right through to the championship fight. Telling detail, and real detail, his championship career. Go into about his retirement and how his retirement wasn't just one thing or another. Had very little to do with Al Weil fleecing Rocky of some money from the cocktail fight. That was a part of it, but it wasn't the main reason. And he was actually talking as early as late 1954 that he was thinking of retirement, and there was members of his family that were saying that Rocky's going to be retiring soon. So it was on his mind for a while. So we'll go into depth and detail about that. And then obviously the really interesting part, we'll go through his retirement years, 1956, 57, right through until 1969, and go into as much depth and detail as I've managed to find at the moment. And I'm still searching. I'm always looking for stuff into all of that. So there is some truly fascinating stuff that will be coming up about his retirement years that hasn't been covered in any other biography that I know of yet. And I'm pretty sure I've got them all. So unless it's a version in Italian or something, or some language that I unfortunately can't read. But no, all the English language, there's going to be stuff in there that I think a few people are going to go, oh, it's interesting.
I finished the first volume quick, and I cannot wait for the second one. But you said something earlier. You like
That's
Rocky
impressive.
before.
It's a big book. That's impressive.
It is, but I again, it was one. I know you hear it all the time. They say you couldn't put it down. And I really couldn't.
Yeah.
So now, obviously, you were a big Rocky Marciano fan. Why is it that you like him more now after all the research than you did before? Because sometimes when you know somebody more, there's an old Italian saying, you have to eat an infinite amount of salt with somebody before you get to know them, which with me is like one day. But you really knew Rocky inside and out. What was it about him that you liked him more now and respected him more now than even before?
Because he's human. He's a real person to me now. Whereas before, obviously, when I started out, I think I might have told you previously, I bought the first book, the Everett M. Skiing book, and I always thought there's stuff missing from this. Being a fighter myself, not anywhere near, not even in the same stadium, but being a fighter myself, there's certain motivations and certain things that make a fighter. You've got to be either absolutely stupid or you've got to be really brave or have something else going on to get into a ring and allow someone to hit you and to hit someone back. So there's certain motivations that make, when you're in pain and someone punches you, they break your nose or they cut your eye or they break your jaw, there's got to be something there that keeps you going. So I knew that wasn't being covered in Rocky's story previously. Few biographers, Sullivan and Stanton, have had a go at it, and fair play to them. But I knew there was stuff missing. And the more I learn about him, and obviously at the time he was a myth. He died before I was born, so he was never on this planet, so it was all a myth. But when I started learning and I started seeing the human side of Rocky and the real side of Rocky, it just made me think, he really is a remarkable man. And I understand now some of his motivations, and I understand how he could get into a ring, how he could be so placid and lovely and nice outside of it, and how he could go in the ring and absolutely destroy someone.
Right.
Even his own family, he would destroy his own family when he sparred with his own family. He didn't care. When he was in that ring,
he busted his brother up a few times, yeah.
Yeah, oh yes, he would just go for it. His tongue would come out between his lips.
Right.
When that happened, you were in trouble when that happened. So, but yeah, he's human. He's human. He was a person, and he actually walks on this earth, and it makes what he achieved even more remarkable because he's not a mythical figure. He's Rocco Marciano, born in 1923, sadly passed away in 1969. And he did these things despite the odds being against him.
Mm-hmm. One thing I want to ask you about, what did you think when you were going in the ring? What was going through your mind? And in your book, did you talk about Rocky's mindset, maybe walking to the ring, or what people said? What was yours? And maybe you talk about how Rocky felt going to the ring.
My mindset when I went in the ring was absolutely nothing.
Okay.
Seriously, I would be in before a fight. I'd sort of, you get the nerves and that, and a bit like, because obviously did amateur and a little bit of professional, but we don't talk about that because it was a yoke backhanders. But you'd be in the same room with all the other guys you were fighting, so you didn't know who you were fighting, etc. It would literally be just a case of get your gloves on, go. You're going in the ring. As soon as I got to that point and the doors opened and I walked through into the room and it just blinkers on, go. I even used to get really sort of anxious and angry when the fight finished and the referee was sending me back to my corner because I'd be thinking, I just want to carry on fighting. But so literally I thought nothing. But the one thing that I am not going to do, and this is a promise I made to myself and to the family of Rocky as well, is I'm not going to put thoughts into Rocky's head. So unless I read something or hear an interview from Rocky with him talking about his feelings, I'm not going to make assumptions or assume, because that's wrong. That would be lying about who Rocky is or Rocky's thoughts. So there's a few audio interviews that Rocky's done where he gives the odd impression of he has a passing thought about who he's going to fight, but that goes quickly, and when he gets hit, he doesn't really feel pain. He feels like a sensation, but it's not like pain or anything like that. But no, I wouldn't be able to say what Rocky was thinking when he went to a ring, because I don't know, and I don't want to. This is a biography. It's not fiction. It's it's his real life. So unless something comes along in the research that said Rocky felt this, that, or anything else, then I won't use anything that's an assumption or an aside. Or I hope that answers your question.
I know he fell asleep a lot. He fell asleep before fights, which was crazy. They had to wake him up.
Normally
because he would
happens
be
when I
out.
talk.
That's too relaxed. You
Yeah,
fall asleep. Wow.
But two things before we tell everybody where
I can
to.
still put people to sleep even at my age.
Yep. But before we tell everybody where we can get your book, do you cover the Ali relationship, because they became very close after the computer fight, during the computer fight?
That will all be covered in real depth and detail in the second volume. There's actually a book out there called Ghosts in the Machine, which is something that I worked on with Ferdy Pacheco.
I didn't know that.
Got it for me. Here we go. So that's something that I worked on with Ferdy Pacheco several years ago. As you know, he passed away a while ago. And he contacted me because he was doing a project on the Marciano Ali super fight, because he was obviously there. And he said he wanted somebody who could kind of balance the scales a little bit, because it was more Muhammad sort of biased than anything else, which it would be because it was Ferdy Pacheco. So I worked on it with him, did some stuff for the Marciano, added a few bits in. Then obviously, sadly, Ferdy passed away, and I was given the rights to use the material. So that's available out there. Ghost in the Machine, Marciano versus Ali. But obviously, in the second volume, I'll be going into even more depth because I've discovered more since. Good. And it just goes to show with Rocky Marciano, who at one stage didn't dislike Muhammad Ali, didn't dislike him, but he was kind of a bit dubious about some of his motivations. But the two became extraordinary friends, which Muhammad constantly alluded back to in interviews going forward, just how much these two men respected each other.
Yeah, they loved each other very much, which I liked hearing that. Finally, before we can tell everybody where to get the book real quick, when you and I first connected years ago, talked about a good movie about Rocky. Do you still think that has a shot to happen? And would you get involved in it? And would you give me a call on it, and I'll help you out? But I think it's necessary. I really do.
It is necessary, yeah. I mean, it's a possibility now. Obviously, there was one supposed to be with Jeremy Renner being made about 5, 6, 7 years ago, but that's all gone by the by. Mm-hmm. I'd love to see a movie get made on Rocky Marciano. A proper movie, not a Hollywood right. movie. I'd love to see a proper movie. Whether it will happen, probably not in my lifetime. Movies are going away from that, but you never know, do you? You never know. And I'd love to be involved in it.
All right. Well, real quick, John, tell everybody where they can get the book.
So the book's available, the book Redemption. Put it just here, look. Just because, I'm quite slick. I've got The Redemption, The Life of Rocky Marciano, Volume 1, 1923 to 1949. It's available on Amazon, so you can order it from any Amazon site wherever you are in the world. It's also orderable as well on the high street, so if you go into your Walmarts or other stores that sell books, you can actually order it from there as well. You can't pick it up off the shelf, but you can order it through there. So if you can't get on Amazon, get into your local high street bookseller and you'll be able to order it.
All right. Well, you know what, John? I'm going to be in touch with you because we're going to try to get it on the shelves with the Barnes & Noble. I'll get back to you on that. But thank you so much for being on the show. I enjoy connecting with you and talking with you whenever I can do to help you with the book. I know Luther and Jim enjoyed this.
Yes,
We talk about
yes.
Rocky all the time. Luther says, I crowbar him in somehow.
Every show.
Every show. But thank you so much for your
Buy the
time.
book then. Buy the book.
That's right. We'll get them. We'll get them. I gave
Thank
them
you
my
very
book. They
much.
still haven't read it, but that's okay. But
Jim can't read, so that's his excuse.
But John, thank you
Got
so much,
pictures in it.
and continued success, and we'll be in touch for sure.
Thank
Thanks,
you very
John.
much. Appreciate it all. Thank
right,
you,
brother.
guys.
Talk to you soon.
Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, guys. I know I enjoyed that. I'm sure you guys did as well.
Yes, learned a lot about Rocky, man. He keeps, every time we talk about it, he keeps moving more and more
The
higher
fish-
on my list.
Oh, okay. All right. Jim, real quick. Anything on Rocky?
Great.
All right. That's it. One word. That's good enough for Jim. All right. Okay. As always, we hope you enjoy our show as much as we enjoy bringing it to you. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Boxing Authorities.
Before we go on, please subscribe, like, and ring the notification bell to learn more about the remarkable Rocky Marciano.
When the chips are down and the bell will ring, Rocky comes through and the birdies sing. His left and rights land on the chin, and a trip to dreamland is about to begin. When they look for a left, he gives them a right. With either hand, he packs dynamite. His mama's cooking up in Brockton town has made a chant that can't be kept down.
There's a champion inside.